Hey guys, today we're looking at 3.5, finding exact trig values of quadrantal angles. So a quadrantal angle is when a rotation has its terminal side and it lands on one of the axes. Okay, so for these, we're not going to have triangles. If my rotation ends on an axis, it's just going to create a point there. Okay, so we build this off of something called the unit circle, which we'll talk more about in the future. But we label these points being 1 unit away from the origin. So these points are 1, 0, 0, 1, -1, 0, and 0, -1. Okay, now if we can't build a triangle to find the exact values for these, we have to somehow relate the opposite, the hypotenuse, and the adjacent side to the values that I do have here. So the values that I do have are x and y from each ordered pair. Okay, and I have a radius, an r, from the origin. Okay, so how could I relate x, y, and r to the opposite, the adjacent, and the hypotenuse side of a triangle? Well, in order to do that, let's actually build a triangle. Okay, it doesn't matter which quadrant you put it in, so I'm just going to use the first. Okay, and so that's a little theta squished down there as my reference angle. So in relation to my theta, this is my opposite side, this is adjacent, and this is my hypotenuse. Okay, well, the opposite side corresponds to which axis? Opposite corresponds to the y-axis. Adjacent side corresponds to the x. Now, if I take this terminal side, the hypotenuse, and if we spin that around the coordinate plane, it would make a circle. And what would the hypotenuse represent if I did that, if I made a rotation? That would be the radius. So hypotenuse is r. Okay, so we want to note that just like when we did exact trig values in 3.4, the hypotenuse was always positive. R is always going to be positive for quadrantals, and the value of r is always going to be 1. Okay, so I want you to take a minute, pause the video, and we want to write down these ratios on the bottom corresponding our opposite, adjacent, and hypotenuse sides to x, y, and r. So these are what we're going to be using instead of opposite over hypotenuse. We're going to use y over r when we find the exact trig values for a quadrantal. Okay, so we want to find, we're doing 3 values here, 3 trig ratios rather, sine, cosine, and tangent for 90 degrees. So I'm going to draw my angle rotation just like we were doing in 3.4. So here's 90 degrees. Okay, the terminal side ends on the axis. So anytime that happens, we're going to draw our point. And this is 0, 1. So the x value here is 0. The y value is 1. Remember, r is always 1. Okay, now I like to recreate my XYR triangle. So opposite is my y, adjacent is my x, and hypotenuse is r. Okay, I don't really like to have to memorize it. sine I know is opposite over hypotenuse. So opposite here is y, hypotenuse is r. So taking the y and the r values from my diagram, y equals 1, r equals 1. So the sine of 90 degrees is 1. All right, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So when it lands on the axis, we're going to have to memorize that we at least have to relate it to x, y, and r. So adjacent is x, hypotenuse is r. The x value from my diagram is 0. The r value is 1. 0 divided by 1 is 0. So the cosine of 90 degrees is 0. Okay, tangent, opposite over adjacent. Opposite is y, adjacent is x. So the y value from my diagram is 1. The x value is 0. This is undefined. So tangent 90 degrees is undefined. Let's look at some more rotations and a different trig ratio. Okay, negative 3 pi. So if you want, you can take negative 3 pi and convert. Okay, you can cross cancel your pi's. This is negative 540 degrees. So when I draw my angle rotation, I'm going to get one full rotation, and then I have to go another 180 degrees. So that puts me on the negative x-axis. So what point is that? It's negative 1, 0. Okay, so again, draw my little triangle down here. So opposite over hypotenuse, y over r. So the y value from my diagram is 0, r always being 1. Sine of negative 3 pi is 0. Or negative 540, whatever you want to say. Cosine, adjacent over hypotenuse, is x over r. So my x value from the diagram is negative 1, r is positive 1, cosine is negative 1. Tangent Have you noticed that we're only getting certain values? We're only getting 0, negative 1, positive 1, undefined. So for quadrantal angles, those are the only 4 things that you should be getting as a final answer. If you get 1/2 or √2, you've done something wrong. All right, so let's try a few more. So cosecant, secant, and tangent. All right, so negative 450 degrees. we're going to go 1 full rotation and then need an additional 90. Okay, so that ordered pair is 0, -1. Okay, and label that X and Y. Ooh, that was an ugly triangle. Not much better. Okay, make your X, Y, and R triangle. Alright, so cosecant, to take a little bit more thought process here. So cosecant comes from sine. Sine is opposite over hypotenuse. So this is hypotenuse over opposite, which is R over Y. So the R value is always a +1. The Y from my diagram is -1. Alright, secant is related to cosine. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So this has to be hypotenuse over adjacent. Okay, again, my R is always +1. The X from my diagram is 0. So secant here is undefined. Alright, last one. So tangent, opposite over adjacent. No need to flip that. Y over X. So -1 over 0. So tangent is undefined as well.